The moment a king breaks his own law, the world doesn't forgive him. It hunts him. The voice echoed like a warning carried by the wind, long before Elena Hart ever stepped onto that abandoned highway construction site at 11:42 p.m., her boots crunching over loose gravel and cracked concrete, the cold cutting through her thin jacket as she adjusted the strap of her worn tool bag and kept walking, because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering how close she was to losing everything. The half-built overpass stretched above her like a skeleton of steel and shadow, unfinished beams reaching into the night sky, swaying faintly as the wind pushed through, creating a low, hollow hum that made the entire place feel alive in a way it shouldn't be. She wasn't supposed to be here this late, but overtime paid an extra $18 an hour, and $18 meant heat for another week. Maybe groceries that didn't come in a can. She exhaled slowly, watching the vapor fade, telling herself it was just another shift, just another night, until she saw him. At first, he didn't look like anything special, just a man standing too still near the edge of the unfinished road, his figure half swallowed by darkness, tall, unmoving, as if he'd been there longer than the structure itself. Elena hesitated, her instincts whispering that something wasn't right, but then the wind shifted, carrying the faintest sound, a breath, uneven, controlled but strained, and without thinking, she stepped closer. "Hey," she called out, her voice quieter than she intended, echoing slightly against the concrete pillars. "You okay?" The man didn't answer right away, and for a second, she considered turning back, because this wasn't her problem, because she had enough problems already, but something about the way he stood there, alone in a place no one should be at this hour, pulled at her in a way she couldn't ignore. She reached into her bag, pulling out the only spare jacket she had, worn and thin but still warm enough, and closed the distance between them step by careful step, her heart beating just a little faster with each one. When she finally stood in front of him, she caught a glimpse of his face. Beneath the dim construction light, pale, almost unnaturally so, sharp features carved in shadow, and eyes that, even in the dark, seemed too deep, too aware. Still, she didn't step back. Instead, she held out the jacket, her voice steady despite the strange tension in the air. "You shouldn't be out here like this," she said softly, "not alone." And for the first time, the man moved, his gaze lifting to meet hers, something ancient flickering behind those eyes for just a second too long, as if her words had reached a place no one had touched in years. And in that quiet, fragile moment, Elena didn't realize she had just done something no one in centuries had dared to do. She had reached a king before the world remembered who he was. Elena's hand hovered between them for a second too long, the worn fabric of the jacket swaying slightly in the wind, and for reasons she could not explain, her pulse refused to slow down. The man did not take it immediately. He only looked at her, really looked, as if memorizing every detail, every flaw, every ordinary thing about her that should not have mattered, and yet somehow did. "You should leave," he said finally, his voice low, smooth, carrying an edge of something distant, something controlled, the kind of tone that made people listen without understanding why. Elena frowned slightly, tightening her grip on the jacket instead of pulling it back. "Yeah, I could say the same to you," she replied, a hint of stubbornness slipping through her exhaustion, because she had spent too many nights being told what to do by people who never stayed to help. The wind picked up again, stronger this time, rushing through the hollow structure above them, and for a brief second, the entire site seemed to fall silent afterward, unnaturally silent, like the world itself was holding its breath. Then it happened. The faint glow appeared first, barely noticeable, a soft flicker at the edge of Elena's vision, and before she could question it, the man stepped closer, closing the distance between them in a way that felt too fast, too precise, his hand lifting as if drawn by something beyond his control. When his fingers brushed against hers, it was not warmth she felt, but a strange, steady chill that traveled up her arm and settled deep in her chest. And at the exact same moment, a faint pattern ignited beneath her skin, delicate lines of light forming across her wrist like something ancient waking up after centuries of silence. Elena gasped softly, instinctively pulling back, but the connection did not break right away. It lingered, pulsing once, twice, before fading just enough to leave her breath unsteady. "What was that?" she whispered. Her voice no longer steady, her mind racing for a logical explanation that refused to come. The man's expression changed, not dramatically, but enough for her to notice, the control in his features tightening, his gaze darkening with something that looked dangerously close to realization. He looked down at his own hand, where the same faint pattern had appeared, mirroring hers perfectly, glowing just beneath the surface of his pale skin. For the first time since she had seen him, he seemed unsettled, not afraid, not exactly, but aware of something that should not have happened. "You need to go," he said again, but this time the words carried weight, not as a suggestion, but as a warning. Elena shook her head slightly, still trying to process what she had just seen. "No, you do not get to say that, and then just walk away," she replied, her voice gaining strength despite the unease creeping in. "What is going on?" The silence that followed stretched too long, heavy and thick, until it was broken by a distant sound, low at first, then growing clearer. Engines, more than one, moving fast but controlled, approaching without the chaos of ordinary traffic. Elena turned her head toward the entrance of the site, her stomach tightening as sleek black vehicles slid into view, their headlights cutting clean lines through the darkness, stopping with impossible precision just yards away. Doors opened in perfect unison, and the figures that stepped out moved with a kind of fluid coordination that did not belong to any normal group of people. Elena's breath caught as every instinct in her body told her one thing. This was not a coincidence, and whatever she had just triggered it had just called something far bigger than she was ready to face. The engine stopped, but the silence that followed was louder than anything Elena had ever heard, pressing in on her ears, tightening around her chest as the figures stepped forward in perfect alignment, their movements too smooth, too precise, like they were not reacting but executing something already decided long before they arrived. Elena instinctively took a step back, her boots scraping against loose gravel. But the man in front of her did not move away, he only shifted slightly, positioning himself between her and the approaching group without even looking back, as if her safety had already become a priority he did not question. One of the figures moved ahead of the others, taller, his long coat catching the dim construction light, and when he stopped, every other figure froze instantly behind him, not out of hesitation, but obedience. He lowered his head slightly, not enough to bow fully, but enough to acknowledge something greater, and his voice cut clean through the cold air, calm, controlled. "My king," he said, and the words seemed to change everything. Elena blinked, her mind struggling to catch up. "King." The word echoed in her head, not fitting with the man she had just offered a jacket to, not fitting with the quiet moment that had just happened between them. But before she could process it, the rest of the group followed, one by one, dropping to one knee against the concrete, their eyes lowered, their posture rigid with respect. Elena's breath caught as she slowly turned her gaze back to the man beside her, to Lucian, and suddenly every detail she had ignored felt different, heavier. The stillness, the way he held himself, the way the air seemed to shift around him. "What did they just call you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. But he heard it. Of course he did, because his head tilted slightly toward her, his expression unreadable, and for a moment, he did not answer. Instead, his attention shifted past her, toward the figures, now waiting in silence. And when he finally spoke, his voice was no longer quiet, no longer distant. It carried something absolute, something that did not ask to be obeyed. It simply was, "Stand," he said. The command was soft, but immediate, and every single figure rose in perfect unison, their eyes lifting just enough to glance toward Elena. And in those brief looks, she saw it. Not curiosity, not confusion, but recognition, and something else beneath it, something closer to alarm. The man in front spoke again, more urgently this time. "My king, this situation must be addressed immediately." His gaze flicked toward Elena, then back. "The mark, it has already begun." Elena's stomach dropped as she instinctively looked down at her wrist, where the faint lines of light had returned, stronger now, clearer, pulsing gently beneath her skin as if responding to the attention. And when she looked back up, Lucian was already watching her, his eyes darker, more intense, as if the world around them had shifted into something far more dangerous than she could understand. For a second, no one moved, no one spoke, until a second voice broke. The tension, sharper, colder, from somewhere behind the first. Then there is only one course. The figure stepped forward, his expression rigid. She must be separated before the bond completes. Elena felt the words before she fully understood them, her chest tightening, her instincts screaming that whatever they meant, it would not end with her walking away. But before anyone else could move, Lucian did. Not fast, not aggressively, just a single step forward that somehow changed the entire balance of the space, placing himself fully between her and them, his presence alone enough to halt every motion. When he spoke again, his voice dropped, quieter, but heavier than anything before. "No," he said, and that single word carried more finality than anything Elena had ever heard, as if the decision had already been made long before this moment, long before she ever stepped onto that broken stretch of road, and now there was no turning back. The word lingered in the air long after he said it, quiet but immovable, and for a moment no one seemed to breathe, not Elena, not the figures surrounding them, not even the wind that had been whispering through the steel above. It was as if that single refusal had rewritten the rules of the space itself. Elena felt it before she understood it, the shift, subtle but undeniable, like standing on ground that had just begun to crack beneath the surface. Her eyes moved from Lucian to the others, searching for some sign that this was normal, that this was something people could just walk away from. But what she saw instead made her chest tighten. The man who had spoken earlier straightened fully now, no longer cautious, no longer measured. His gaze fixed on Lucian with something sharper, something that felt dangerously close to defiance. "My king," he said again. But the title no longer sounded the same, no longer carried the same quiet loyalty. "This is not a matter of preference. The law is clear." His voice echoed slightly against the unfinished concrete, firm, unwavering. The bond must not be allowed to complete with a human. The word human landed differently this time, heavier, colder, and Elena felt it settle over her, like a weight she had never agreed to carry. She swallowed, her fingers curling slightly at her sides as the faint glow on her wrist pulsed again, brighter now, more insistent, as if reacting to every word being spoken. Lucian did not look at her when it happened, but she could feel that he knew, could feel that his awareness of her was constant, unbroken. "You speak of law," he said, his tone even, controlled. But there was something beneath it now, something that did not need to rise to be heard, as if it exists above consequence. His gaze shifted slowly across the group, and for the first time, Elena saw hesitation ripple through them, small, almost invisible, but real. The man held his ground, though, his expression tightening. "The consequences already unfolding," he replied, his eyes flicking once more toward Elena's wrist, then back. "You know what this means, you know what will follow." Silence stretched again, heavier this time, charged with something Elena could not name but could feel pressing in from every direction. She took another small step back without meaning to, her shoulder brushing lightly against one of the cold concrete pillars, grounding her just enough to keep from losing her balance completely. "I do not belong here," she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the tension more sharply than she expected, drawing every gaze toward her at once. "I do not even know what this is, or what any of you are talking about." Her breath came faster now, her mind racing, trying to hold on to something real, something normal. "So whatever this is, whatever you think happened, you can figure it out without me." She turned slightly, instinct telling her to leave, to put distance between herself and whatever this had become. But before she could take more than a single step, Lucian's voice stopped her. "If you walk away now," he said, quieter than before, but infinitely more certain, "they will not let you remain unaware." Elena froze, her back still partially turned, the words settling into her with a clarity that made her pulse spike. Slowly, she turned back, meeting his gaze, searching for any sign that he was exaggerating, that this was not as serious as it sounded. But there was nothing there except truth, cold and undeniable. Behind him, the others had gone completely still again, no longer stepping forward, no longer speaking, but watching, waiting, as if whatever happened next would decide something far larger than any one person in that moment. And standing there, caught between a life she understood and a world she did not, Elena realized with a sinking certainty that leaving was no longer as simple as turning around and walking away. The words settled into Elena like cold water, slow and unavoidable. And for the first time since the vehicles arrived, she stopped trying to leave. Instead, she stood there, caught in the space between fear and something far more unsettling. The sense that this moment had already moved beyond her control. The glow on her wrist pulsed again, brighter now, no longer faint or uncertain, but steady, deliberate, as if it had found its rhythm. She looked down at it, her breath shallow, tracing the pattern with her eyes, lines that curved and intertwined in a way that felt intentional, ancient, like a language she almost understood but could not quite read. "This is not possible," one of the figures said quietly, the tension in his voice breaking through the controlled silence. And Elena lifted her head again, her gaze moving from one face to another, searching for something human in their reactions, something familiar, but finding none. They were all watching her now, not with curiosity, but with calculation, as if she had become something they needed to understand before deciding what to do next. Lucian had not moved, not even slightly, but the space around him felt different, heavier, as if everything in the area adjusted itself around his presence without question. "Explain it," Elena said suddenly, her voice firmer than she felt, cutting through the stillness. "All of it, right now." Her eyes locked onto his, refusing to look away, because if she did, she was afraid she might lose whatever fragile sense of control she still had. For a moment, he said nothing, and she wondered if he would refuse, if he would leave her standing there with half answers and no way back. But then he stepped closer again, not enough to intimidate, but enough to be unmistakably present. "What you felt," he began, his voice lower now, measured, "is a binding that should not exist." The words were simple, but the weight behind them was not. And Elena felt her chest tighten again. "It connects two lives in a way that cannot be undone once it is complete." Her fingers curled instinctively, her gaze dropping briefly to the glowing pattern again before lifting back to him. "Complete?" she repeated, the word catching slightly as she tried to steady her voice. "And if it does?" This time, the silence came not from hesitation, but from the others, the group behind him shifting subtly, as if the question itself carried consequences they did not want spoken aloud. Lucian did not look away, did not soften the truth. "Then your life will no longer belong only to you," he said. And something in the way he said it made Elena realize he was not threatening her. He was warning her. A faint sound echoed above them, metal shifting in the wind, but it barely registered compared to the weight of that statement. "And if it does not?" she asked quickly, almost too quickly, as if she needed the alternative to exist. This time, it was not Lucian who answered. "Then it ends before it begins," the first man said, stepping forward again, his tone controlled but sharper now. "And balance is restored." Elena felt the meaning behind the words without needing further explanation, felt it settle into her with a clarity that made her pulse spike again. She looked between them, between the calm certainty in Lucian's expression and the rigid resolve in the others, and for the first time, she understood that whatever choice was being discussed, it was not one she would be allowed to make freely. And standing there, with the glow on her wrist growing stronger with every passing second, Elena realized that this was no longer about understanding what had happened, it was about what they were willing to do because of it. The tension did not break. It thickened, settling into the space like something alive, something waiting, and Elena could feel it pressing in from every direction, as if the unfinished highway itself had become a cage. Her pulse matched the rhythm of the light on her wrist now, steady, insistent, impossible to ignore, and every time it pulsed, the air seemed to respond, subtle but real, like the world was aware of something changing. She swallowed, forcing herself to stay grounded, to stay present, even as everything around her felt like it was slipping out of reach. "You keep talking about this like it is already decided," she said, her voice sharper now, cutting through the silence again. "Like I do not get a say in what happens to me." Her eyes moved from Lucian to the others and back again, searching for any sign that she was wrong. that this was not as absolute as it sounded. No one answered immediately, and that silence told her more than words ever could. Lucian's gaze did not waver, but there was something different in it now, something heavier, as if the weight of what he knew had finally reached a point where it could not be ignored. There are laws that exist beyond choice, he said quietly, not as an excuse, but as a fact, and Elena felt something tighten in her chest at the calm certainty in his voice. Then maybe those laws are wrong. She shot back before she could stop herself, the words coming faster now, fueled by a mix of fear and frustration she could no longer contain. Because I did not ask for any of this. The glow on her wrist flared slightly as she spoke, brighter than before, reacting to something deeper than just the words themselves. Behind Lucian, the figures shifted again, more noticeably this time, their composure cracking just enough to reveal the urgency beneath it. "My king," the first man said, his voice lower now, but more intense. "The bond is accelerating." His eyes flicked briefly to Elena's wrist, then back. "If it reaches the next phase, it will no longer be contained." Elena felt the meaning behind that statement even without understanding the details, felt it settle into her like a warning she could not ignore. She looked back at Lucian, searching his face again, looking for hesitation, for doubt, for anything that might tell her this could still be stopped. But what she found instead was something far more unsettling. Resolve, not cold, not indifferent, but firm in a way that did not bend. "Then we do not contain it," he said, and the words landed harder than anything before them. The reaction was immediate, a ripple of disbelief moving through the group, sharp and unmistakable, and for the first time, Elena saw something close to fear in their expressions, not fear of her, but fear of what his decision meant. "You would risk everything," another voice said from behind the first, quieter but no less intense. "For someone you met minutes ago." The question hung in the air, heavy, demanding an answer, and for a brief second, Elena felt it too. The weight of that question, the impossibility of it, the sheer scale of what was being suggested. Lucian did not look at them when he responded, his attention never leaving her, as if the rest of the world had already begun to fade. "It is not a risk," he said, his voice steady, unshaken. "It is a consequence, and something." In the way he said it made Elena realize that whatever was happening here, whatever had been set in motion the moment their hands touched, it was not something that could be undone by walking away, or by denying it, or by pretending it did not exist. It had already crossed that line, and standing there, with the glow on her wrist growing stronger and the world around her shifting in response, Elena understood that this was no longer about avoiding what was coming, it was about whether anyone could stop it at all. The word consequence did not fade. It settled into the ground beneath them, into the steel beams above, into Elena's chest where her heartbeat refused to slow. And for the first time, she felt something shift inside herself. Not just fear, not just confusion, but something stronger, something steadier. She lifted her chin slightly, her fingers uncurling at her sides as the light on her wrist flared again, brighter than before. No longer just reacting but responding, as if it recognized her decision before she fully formed it. "Then stop talking about me like I am not here," she said, her voice cutting through the tension with a clarity that surprised even her, drawing every gaze back to her once more. "If this is about my life, then I am part of it." The air seemed to tighten again, but this time it was different, less like pressure and more like resistance, as if something unseen was pushing back. The figures exchanged brief glances, subtle but telling, their composure shifting. Again, not breaking, but adjusting, recalculating. "You do not understand what you are stepping into," the first man said, his tone no longer just firm, but edged with something that sounded almost like warning, not threat. "This is not a world you can walk through and leave unchanged." Elena let out a slow breath, steadying herself, the cold air filling her lungs as she held his gaze without flinching. "I already am changed," she replied, her voice quieter now, but no less certain, and she lifted her wrist slightly, the glowing pattern catching the dim light. Undeniable, impossible to ignore. Silence followed, heavier than before, because this time there was no argument against it, no denial that could erase what was already there. Lucian's gaze remained on her, But there was something new in it now, something that had not been there when they first met. Not just awareness, not just control, but recognition, as if he was seeing her not as a consequence, not as a variable, but as something far more fixed. The bond does not respond to fear, he said quietly, his voice steady, measured. It responds to intent. Elena frowned slightly, her pulse quickening again as she tried to understand what that meant, and before she could ask, the light on her wrist shifted, the pattern sharpening, the lines becoming clearer, more defined, and for a brief second, she felt it, not just as a sensation, but as something deeper, something that connected her awareness to his in a way that was impossible to explain. Her breath caught, her eyes lifting to meet his again, and in that moment, the distance between them felt smaller than it should have been, as if something invisible had closed the space without either of them moving. Behind him, the reaction was immediate, sharper this time, more urgent. It is progressing faster, another voice said, tension breaking through the controlled tone. If it stabilizes, it cannot be reversed. The words echoed, but Elena barely heard them now, because her focus was fixed, not on the group, not on the danger they represented, but on the connection she could no longer deny. Lucian took a single step closer, slow, deliberate, and the air shifted with him, as if the world itself acknowledged the movement. You should be afraid, he said, not as a warning, but as truth. And Elena held his gaze, her heart still racing, her mind still catching up, but her voice steady when she answered. Maybe, she said softly, but I am not walking away. And in that quiet declaration, something changed again, not just in her, not just in him, but in everything around them, as if the moment had finally crossed a threshold that could not be undone, and for the first time, the figures behind him did not step forward, did not speak, because they understood what had just happened. This was no longer something they could stop before it began. The moment her words settled, the air seemed to tighten in response, as if the world itself had been waiting for that exact choice. And now that it had been made, there was no hesitation left, no pause. Only movement. The light on Elena's wrist flared again, no longer just a glow but something sharper, more defined, the pattern spreading slightly along her skin like it was anchoring itself. And this time the ground beneath her feet responded, a subtle vibration running through the unfinished concrete, barely noticeable but impossible to deny once felt. She inhaled sharply, her eyes widening just slightly, but she did not step back. Lucian did not look away from her, not even for a second, and in that unwavering focus, there was something unspoken, something that felt less like control and more like alignment, as if whatever force had been set in motion was no longer pulling them in separate directions, but the same one. Behind him, the reaction was no longer contained. It is stabilizing, one of the figures said, his voice lower now, edged with something that sounded almost like disbelief. This should not be happening at this rate. Another voice followed, sharper, more urgent. If it stabilizes fully, the bond will become permanent. The word permanent echoed through the space, heavier than anything before it, and Elena felt it settle into her chest with a clarity that made her pulse spike again. She looked down at her wrist once more, watching the lines shift, adjust, almost like they were completing something unfinished, and for the first time, she did not try to pull away from it, did not try to deny it. She lifted her gaze back to Lucian, searching his expression. Again, but there was no hesitation there, no second guessing, only certainty. What happens next? She asked quietly, the question simple but carrying everything she did not yet understand. The silence that followed was different this time, not heavy, not uncertain, but deliberate, as if every answer carried weight that could not be undone once spoken. Lucian stepped closer again, slow, controlled, and when he spoke, his voice was lower, more direct, meant only for her, even though everyone could hear it. Now, he said, they decide whether to accept what has already begun or to stand against it. The words were calm, but the meaning behind them was not, and Elena felt it immediately. The shift in the group behind him, subtle but undeniable, their posture tightening, their attention sharpening, as if a line had just been drawn that could not be erased. The first man stepped forward again, no longer cautious, no longer restrained, his gaze fixed on Lucian with a resolve that did not bend. "If the bond is allowed to complete," he said, his voice steady but firm, "it will change more than just you." His eyes flicked briefly toward Elena, then back. "It will shift the balance that has held for centuries." Elena felt the weight of that statement, felt the scale of it pressing in from all sides. But instead of stepping back, instead of retreating, she found herself holding her ground, her fingers steady at her sides, her breathing controlled despite everything. "Then maybe it is time it changed," she said, the words leaving her before she could second-guess them, quiet but unwavering. And for a moment, everything seemed to stop again. The wind, the distant hum of the city, even the faint creak of steel above. And in that stillness, something invisible but undeniable settled into place, not just between her and Lucian, but across the entire space, as if the world itself had just registered a decision it could not ignore, and now it would have to respond. No one spoke at first, not because there was nothing left to say, but because every word now carried consequence too large to be taken back. The silence stretched, heavy and absolute, as if the world itself had paused to consider what had just been set in motion. Elena could feel it in the air, in the ground beneath her feet, in the steady, unyielding pulse of the mark on her wrist that no longer flickered or shifted, but held firm, complete in a way that made her breath catch. She did not look away from Lucian, not now, not after everything that had just been said, because something inside her understood that this moment mattered more than anything that came before it. Behind him, the figures no longer shifted or argued, their earlier resistance replaced by something colder, more calculated, as if the question was no longer whether they could stop this, but what they would do because they could not. The first man stepped forward again, slower this time, his posture straight, his expression no longer conflicted, but resolved. "Then it is done," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the empty construction site, echoing faintly against the steel and concrete. "The bond has taken hold." The words settled into the space like a final verdict, and for a brief second, Elena felt the full weight of them, not as fear, but as reality. She exhaled slowly, her shoulders lowering just slightly as she allowed herself to accept what she could no longer deny. Lucian did not move, but there was a subtle shift in his stance, something almost imperceptible, as if the tension that had held him in place had finally given way to something steadier, something certain. "You understand what follows," another voice said, quieter now, but no less firm. "This will not remain contained. Others will know." The implication was clear, spreading outward beyond this place, beyond this moment, into something far larger than any one decision. Elena felt it too, the sense that whatever had just happened here would not stay hidden, that it would ripple outward into a world she had never seen, but was now undeniably part of. She looked at Lucian again, searching his expression one last time, and this time, what she found was not distance, not control, but something grounded, something that met her where she stood. "Then let them know," he said, his voice calm, unshaken, as if the outcome had never been in question. And in that quiet certainty, something settled into Elena as well, something that felt dangerously close to resolve. The wind returned then, stronger than before, rushing through the unfinished structure, carrying with it a low, distant hum that had not been there before, like the beginning of something waking up. The figures around them did not move to stop it, did not step forward again, because they understood what it meant. This was no longer a moment that could be undone or redirected. It had crossed that line. Elena tightened her fingers slightly, not in fear, but in grounding, anchoring herself to the only thing that still felt certain in that shifting reality. And as she stood there beside him, no longer just caught in the middle but part of it, she realized that whatever came next would not be about survival alone. It would be about standing in a world that had already decided to push back. And somewhere beyond the empty stretch of highway, beyond the silence and the steel and the cold night air, something